Hi all, my name is Davis and welcome back to my channel where we talk about all things tech, and today we are reviewing quite possibly the most anticipated phone of the year, the iPhone 16 Pro Max. And while it's been a fairly controversial launch, as every iPhone launch seems to be, the question is this year whether or not it is worth the upgrade from something like a 15 Pro, 14 Pro, or perhaps something a little bit older. Well, I've been using this phone for 2 weeks now, and spoiler alert, despite the relatively small changes on the surface, this is by far my favorite iPhone that I've used, quite possibly since the 13 Pro. And photography-wise, it really takes the iPhone to the next level. Why is this the case? Well, let's tuck into this super long review and find out. So this video is brought to you by the Arc Pulse case. Do you want the feel of a naked phone, but want the peace of mind of using protection? Well, me too, and the Arc Pulse case has been my perfect solution to this problem over the past year. This is the longest period of time that I have used a single case on my phone, because where a normal case would be on its last legs by now, since the Arc Pulse is made entirely of aluminium, while it is very light, structurally it is still holding up perfectly and actually looking better with use. Like a stainless steel watch or even the back of an old iPod, with use, this case actually starts to look better. As you can see on this gold example, you can see the patina begin to develop, uncovering some of that gorgeous silver underneath, giving it a really unique look. Okay, I hear what you're saying. You're concerned about drop protection because the phone is so exposed. But unless you are really clumsy and run over your phone regularly with your car, there is no need to be concerned, because I'm the sort of person who likes to drop their phone about 20 times a day, and my phone after a year looks fine. The aluminium frame and the rubber backing absorbs impacts with aplomb, and all of the main drop zones, including the corners and camera hump, are completely covered. And also, if you are the sort of person who likes to switch phone cases often, this is not a concern either, as the Pulse is held on with just friction. To take the case off, all you have to do is pull on the case, and with some force, it comes off for easy cleaning. If you check the Arc Pulse out using my link, you can save 10% off your case, and you can finally enjoy a case that allows you to have that lovely, pleasurable naked experience while still having protection. So let's begin with comparing the 16 Pro to the 15 Pro Max, and while they visually look very similar on the surface, they're actually more different than you might think. Firstly, there's the increase in size. Whereas the old 15 Pro Max had a 6.7-inch OLED display, the new one has a 6.9-inch. And I do have to admit that this is quite possibly my least favorite change to the new iPhone. Where I felt that the 15 Pro Max was actually quite a pleasant size, I could just about use it with one hand quite comfortably, despite the shrinking of the bezels to an amount that frankly looks bezel-less. It's just a little bit too large for me. The phone, while visually doesn't look that much larger, it feels a lot bulkier than it looks in the hand, especially with the increased width. And to me, it really isn't a phone that needed to grow, but at least the weight is roughly the same at a fairly lightweight 227 grams versus 222. At the very least though, the screen is just as gorgeous as ever. Apart from the screen size and bezels, I don't believe that there's been an upgrade in display technology, but there really didn't need to be, because it was already one of the most gorgeous displays you could get on a phone. The ProMotion technology looks as smooth and gorgeous as ever, despite not being a consistent 120Hz like some Android phones. It gets extremely bright in sunlight and when watching HDR video, it can also go down to just 1 nit in brightness. Although from my experience, it doesn't look that different to the 15 Pro at minimum brightness. What is different though is that the 16 Pro screen doesn't seem to dim as much in hot and bright environments as the old phone, but to be fair, I have yet to try it on a hot summer's day. On the other hand, the dynamic islands do look roughly the same to me, and while a lot of people do complain about it, it honestly isn't something that bothers me at all. Let's look at the rest of the hardware design though, and as you can see, last year I went with a natural titanium grey colour, which looked okay at first as it was new, but I never really warmed to it. It looks a little bit too similar to Nardo Grey, which is a very 2018. With a new phone I went with the Desert Titanium, which is a bronzy goldish colour, and while I do quite like it, especially the sides, it is a very pale gold colour on the back, but I do have to admit that it's still not quite the most inspiring colour in the world. The design though is remarkably similar on both phones. Both phones use a titanium frame on the outside, which I love because it's tough and lightweight, and it is a nice resistant brush texture that feels great in the hand, is quite resistant to scratches. The buttons feel just as nice and familiar and clicky as ever, and the speakers are somehow even better than the ones on the 15. That's unbelievable to me. This might be one of the reasons to choose an iPhone over the Android alternatives, especially the Samsung phone. This iPhone speakers really do seem to be in a league of their own, when we're not talking about giant tough phones, that is. On the left side of the phone, we still have the same volume buttons and action button, and on the other side we have a power button and also the brand new camera capture button. We'll talk more about the capture button later, but I do love it, and it frees the action button to do something else. And I've got it set to the orientation lock, and it feels a little bit to me like having that switch that old iPads had where you can lock the orientation. I really have missed it. On the bottom of the phone we have the same USB-C port that supports 3.1 speeds. The standard 16 still only supports USB 2 speeds, I understand. I really do like having this faster USB-C. It allows me to transfer images from a camera to a phone with very little effort. And the upgrade this year is faster charging speeds, up to 45 watts I believe. Well, I usually use wireless charging, which has increased to 25 watts now. This is a nice upgrade if you do need to have an emergency charge, if you've forgotten to charge your phone overnight or something like that, but it's not something that I would generally use. On the back of the phone, looks basically identical, and I'm really not a fan of this design. I've said that I've hated this hideous triple lens design on the 11, and I honestly can't believe that they've stuck to this design for 5 years. I mean, 5 years later and we've still got this hideous lump. It's also not very practical. It rocks on a table a lot, and let's just repeat that it's absolutely hideous. At the very least though, with an Arc Pulse case, which is the sponsor of this video, it does actually improve the looks a lot and stops the phone from rocking. But you really should need to have to purchase a phone case just to make your phone not hideous and not rock when it's placed on a table. This sounds a bit silly, but maybe we should just copy the Google Pixel's horizontal lens layout because it both looks good and is practical. But I digress. Let's talk about performance and battery life. And this is where the 16 Pro really is in a class of its own. While the 15 Pro did have very impressive CPU and GPU performance with the A17 Pro chip, which was actually fast enough to play some console quality games like Wreckfest, the 18 Pro is somehow even better. And I guess that is to be expected, as this is the second generation of their 3nm chip design, which is ahead of basically the entire competition. Whereas the A17 Pro got 2544 single core and 6466 multi-core in Geekbench 6. The benchmarks somehow are even better on the 18 Pro processor at 3389 in single core and 8513 multi-core. That single core performance is seriously impressive, even when compared to desktop chips. I'm actually a little bit embarrassed now that my phone is technically faster than my computer in single core. But let's just ignore that for now because I don't have enough money to upgrade. The new GPU though is even more impressive. The 16 Pro got 32,651 on Geekbench versus 23,855 on the 15 Pro. But the thing is, this is not where it matters most, because it's not often where you have to stretch your processor like that, unless you do a lot of gaming, that is. Rather, it's the sustained performance that is far more impressive to me. And that's because the 16 Pro does not overheat in the same way that the old phone did. While the 15 Pro was fine in most conditions, if you started to do anything processor intensive, or even just charge the phone quickly, or you had to use it outside in the sun, the phone would get almost unbearably hot to hold. And while I didn't realize this at first because I was using the fine woven case, when I switched to the Arc Pulse, where I could actually feel the naked phone itself, you could feel just how often it became a bit worryingly hot. And despite the 16 Pro not getting the new metal encased battery like the standard models, and while it can still get a little bit warm when you are gaming or running benchmarks, thermals are so much better than the 15 Pro, and hopefully it should be a sign of things to come for iPhone thermals in the future. It only takes a minute or so for the 15 Pro Max to get unbearably warm and to drop frames in Wreckfest. Especially it drops frames when you crash through fence items and environment items like that. And on the 16 Pro I can play for much longer and the frame rate is far more consistent because of that. And what's even better than the gaming performance is the battery life. While the battery is only slightly larger on the 16 at 4,685 milliamps, battery life is considerably improved over the 15. Whereas on the 15 I would struggle to make it throughout a 12-hour day. I would often need to top it up halfway through. On the 16, I recently took this phone off the charger at 4 in the morning, and with some fairly heavy usage, including a lot of YouTube and TikTok, I still had 30% at 4 p.m. in the afternoon. The 15 would have been completely dead at this stage. This is the best battery life I've ever had on an iPhone, quite possibly since the 13. And I think that is just such a sign of relief after the 14 and 15, which had very average battery lives. So we love the hardware, but how is the software? And this is probably where a lot of the controversy has arisen from. And that's because of Apple Intelligence. That was one of the largest selling points of the 16, but it doesn't appear at all in the iOS 18 launch version. Rather, Apple Intelligence features will be rolled out slowly over the next few months, beginning with some features being launched in 18.1. Which isn't officially out yet. However, unlike a lot of early reviewers, I've been using the beta version of 18.1. And so I can actually report on what Apple Intelligence is like to use. And I do have to say that it is worth the wait. I have to admit that I'm not a massive fan of a lot of the iOS 18 features. Firstly, I don't like the customization features where you can tint and rearrange your home screen in a million ways. I think it's absolutely hideous and could have been done a lot better. The control center also isn't as nice as it was before, despite having a lot more customization. And I absolutely despise the new Photos app. I can never seem to find the option that I want as it changes all the time. However, there are some features that I love. To accept or not to accept options when you're wearing AirPods, you just shake or nod your head, and I think that is absolutely genius. The new Passwords app is also a massive improvement. To be able to customize the buttons on your lock screen is brilliant too. As I don't know a lot of music, I use Shazam over here. It's quite embarrassing. The vehicle motion cues is also a game changer for people who get car sick like me. And of course there's the introduction of RCS, although I haven't really had the pleasure of using that yet. My favorite improvement though is Apple Intelligence, as you might expect. And while 18.1 doesn't introduce everything that's promised, what we have so far really is quite fantastic. Firstly, we have the new Siri animation. It's just completely gorgeous. I don't think I've ever seen an animation quite as mesmerizing in my life as this one. I also love how you can double tap on the bottom to type Siri as well. That also starts a very beautiful animation too. And while she still isn't fantastic, Siri is a lot better than she used to be. She can actually remember contexts of conversations. More useful though is the way that Apple Intelligence is just sprinkled in the OS. While I do believe that generative AI is quite cool, rarely is it all that useful. So I just love the way that Apple Intelligence just summarizes all of my notifications. No longer do I have to read a million messages to work out what's happened in a group chat, for instance. It would just tell me a nice summary there and then in my notifications. That alone, I believe, is worth having Apple Intelligence for. It does the same thing with emails as well, so I don't have to open my inbox all the time just to know what's important in my inbox. And there's also the cleanup feature to remove things in the background of images. While this is just as bad as it is on other options like Google and whatever, it does work at a pinch. You also have little features like being able to rewrite or proofread text, but honestly, this isn't as useful on a phone as it is on an iPad or computer. If I'm going to be doing a lot of writing, it would be on a larger device. So this is cool and might work for some people at a pinch. So overall, Apple Intelligence, while we haven't seen many of the more exciting features yet, it's already super useful and might be worth trying out the beta for, as it does seem to be fairly stable for me. And now finally, let's talk about my actual favorite thing about the 16 Pro Max, the cameras. And this is a situation where there have been minimal hardware changes, but the changes that have been made just changes everything about the experience. Let's just talk about the hardware changes first, because barely anything has changed there. We've got the same 12 megapixel front-facing camera as the one last year. It's fine, but nothing extraordinary. The photos that it takes look okay, and the videos that it takes are, to be fair, pretty good for a front-facing camera. The only real hardware change seems to be limited to the wide-angle camera, which is equivalent to 13mm in focal length and seems to be the same size sensor as before, but it uses a quad Bayer technology to create 48 megapixel camera images instead of 12, although it really isn't 48 megapixels. And despite the file sizes being 48 megapixels if you choose to shoot in RAW, I just don't really see any more detail than there was before. I mean, look at these two images. The level of detail looks absolutely identical, and you sort of have to question if other reviewers have actually compared the images at all, or if they're just taking Apple's word for it. So if you are planning just to upgrade for the wide camera, please don't, because they are the same. The main camera is also the same 48 megapixel unit as last year, and it's a very good unit. It's got a very large sensor for a phone at 1.28 inches in size, with a focal length of 24mm, which is not my favorite focal length, but it does give you plenty of flexibility. Like with last year, I've actually found out that my favorite focal length is 48mm, which is the 2x crop option, which just crops into the main sensor, which just feel a little bit wasteful to me. The images do look a little bit ordinary, as it is cropping into what's effectively a tiny sensor size, but it's sort of usable if you're just sharing on social media, but you probably don't want to look at it on anything larger than an iPad. And quite interestingly as well, this year both Pro phones get the 5x zoom 120mm lens, instead of that just being limited to the Max version. And while a lot of people don't seem to like this lens much, especially those who like to shoot at the old 3x77mm focal length, I think that this is a good compromise, as it allows people to take far better concert photos and videos than people used to, and it's definitely something that's nice to have. Like a lot of people were impressed with how far they could zoom into Taylor Swift on the old 5x lens, which is the same as the new one. Quality-wise, all the cameras are basically the same as last year, and it really isn't worth talking about, apart from one thing: this new camera control button and what it allows you to do. So the camera control button is basically just a button which also has a capacitive touch layer, which allows you not only to take images far more easily than you could before, as you can now just press the button to engage it, but a few new features that transform the way that you take iPhone images are also included in this update. So firstly, I just love how you can use it to open the camera. Like, the action button could have done this last year, but you would have just wasted this button where it could have been used for something else. But also, when you half press the button, you can also change a number of settings that you couldn't do on other phones. So while you've got things like being able to change your focal length, changing which camera you're using, exposure and such like that, you also get the new exciting options for the first time, including tone and styles. So let's talk about tone first. So over the past few years, while iPhones have been getting better and better camera hardware, the results have been looking increasingly artificial and a little bit weird. With the deep fusion processing technology, the iPhone takes multiple photos and fuses them together in a way that looks extremely odd and artificial, with a distinct overuse of the HDR processing effect. And this one feature called tone, which I'm guessing is short for tone mapping, allows you to adjust just how much HDR you want in the photo. By default, it's on 0, which is quite high already, but if you want, you can make it even worse by turning it up, and that gets rid of shadows almost completely. But if you turn it all the way down to -1, you can finally bring some shadow and contrast to your images, and the difference is really night and day. While this means that you do have to be careful about shadows and bright highlights, it allows you to make your photos look so much more natural than they have since possibly the iPhone 5S or something, without having to turn to taking images in RAW, which takes up a lot more space and also gets rid of some of the nice features like live photos. What's even more exciting though for me are the styles. So I made a prediction video quite a few years ago. I can't remember where, maybe it was on TikTok or something. And I said that phone photography has gotten so good that people just won't care about how good the camera hardware is. And that's true. Like, if you take a look at the flagship iPhone, Pixel, Samsung, Xiaomi phones, whatever, all these cameras are pretty good and people don't really care about which one they use. So rather than focusing on outright hardware, people would want to return to a more natural film-like looking image. like with what we've been saying with the success of the Fuji X100 and their film simulation looks. And the new styles feature is basically that for the iPhone. You can select from a wide range of predefined looks and you can tweak them to your preferences. This means that you can take images without having to add a preset to them afterwards to get the look that you want. This is truly extraordinary. And while it's not new, as Oppo phones for instance have had this feature for years, it's something that's great to finally have on an iPhone. So I've been shooting on my Olympus Pen F for the past few years, and while I know that this is far from the best camera, it's only got a micro four third sensor, whereas the other cameras I own are full frame, I've been using this camera so much because it is just an absolute joy to use. I love the ergonomics, I love the feel of the controls, and I love being able to take JPEG photos with the look that I want baked in already without having to edit them later, because frankly I just don't have time for that. There's nothing worse than coming back from a holiday and having 20,000 photos to sift through and edit. And shooting with the camera button, with the styles, just gives me a very similar joy to shooting on the Pen F. And while it is a small change and not everyone will use it or appreciate it, it is the biggest upgrade to iPhone photography in years because it fundamentally changes the shooting experience. While I do agree with some detractors, the button isn't in the most ergonomic position and the controls are actually quite fiddly to use. I actually find it quite difficult to sift through which particular control I want. This whole camera system just has that sense of fun that makes me want to take images like no iPhone has done before. So over this section I've been showing some photos that I've taken straight from the camera, and as you can see it is just so fun shooting like this, and I look forward to trying all of the other styles over the next few weeks. In other news, the video is just as over-the-top fantastic as what we've been seeing on last year's phone. When shooting normally, the video is pretty much unmatched. The stabilization is incredible, the colors and dynamic range are fantastic, the 4K 120 is extraordinary to have, and the ProRes log option, while it's ridiculous to have on a phone, it allows you to shoot incredible images that are good enough for a Hollywood film. I mean, literally. This feature is dumb and over the top, and I will probably never use it despite having been a professional camera operator in the past. But having ProRes and all of these other video features on a phone, it's a bit like having a nice diver's watch that can go 100 meters underwater, or a Land Rover Defender that can climb mountains. While you will never dive 100 meters or, climb a mountain with a car, these are just things that are nice to have. It's nice to know that your car or your vehicle or your watch can do these extreme things. And this year there's also upgrades to the microphone, and it includes spatial sound, which means that you can far better separate voices from background noise. Hello, mic check, 1 2 1 2. Hello. I am in the garden center and I am looking at flowers. Hello, 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2. And just furthers the iPhone's incredible lead in video recording. This camera system is honestly good enough to put both GoPro out of business, especially with how water resistant phones are these days, and I suspect it will also dampen excitement over digital cameras like this Olympus and Fuji films. So in conclusion, should you get the iPhone 16 Pro Max? In short, yes. But in more detail, this is quite possibly the best iPhone that I've had the pleasure to use since the 13. Not only is the hardware incredible, but it fixes all of the issues that we had with the 15. It's fast without overheating all the time, the battery life is amazing, the cameras are finally fun to use, and Apple Intelligence is actually useful, unlike most AI features that we see on other phones. In short, this is quite possibly the best iPhone that Apple has made in a long time. I would say though, if you've got an iPhone 14 or 15 Pro, you can probably wait another year, but if you have anything older, it is definitely worth the upgrade. And I think that you would really love it. If you've got a standard model iPhone, even a standard 15, I would say worth the upgrade as well. And if you're switching from an Android phone, I would say it would really depend on if you want to switch to the Apple ecosystem, but I would say that you would love it. So thank you for watching my review of the iPhone 16 Pro. If you want to support me and the channel, you can subscribe, give me a like and comment any questions that you might have. You can also check out the Arc Pulse case. That's basically the only case that I'm using at the moment. I've currently got the one for the 15 Pro while I wait for the 16 version to arrive, and it just about squeezes on. And I also get a small commission for every case that's sold with my discount code Davis10. So thank you for watching this video, and until next time, toodaloo.